Hey, this is actually the second video I've made on this subject. The only reason I'm saying that is because I always find it a little bit annoying when I have to delete a video that I've uploaded, but I have done so because it was a bit lengthy. So I'm just saying that to give it some purpose other than having deleted it, if that makes any sense. Maybe it doesn't. Never mind. I want to talk about an unfortunate, tragic, and appalling case that happened in this country 2 years ago, and that was a case of a young man by the name of George Cheese, who took his own life after severe bullying at a plant of the Audi company in Reading, Berkshire, which is a big town near London. Um, and when I'm talking about bullying, I'm not talking about name calling and any bullying is bad, but this was really, really severe stuff, which was basically borderline torture. Apparently, this guy, an apprentice, he was only 18 years old. He would come home from work with cigarette burns in his clothes. In one incident, four men had held him down, a fifth had given him a dead leg, which basically means you're punched very hard to the point where your limb is numb. On another occasion, he'd been put inside a cage and set alight. And the tragedy about this is that he had apparently spoken to his parents about it, and his father urged him to stay on. His father told the Inquest that he is haunted by telling him that he feels totally devastated, and in retrospect, he felt that was a stupid thing to tell his son. But the real villains here, of course, are the absolute creatures. I can't think of enough adjectives to describe what I think of these sort of people that basically hounded this young man to his death. And apparently there'd been other issues going on in his life, that he was having problems with his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend, and that just drove him over the edge. Um, Audi came out with a statement in which they regretted the circumstances, called it tragic, and said that they do not tolerate this sort of culture in their plants. But notably, the statement made no mention of the fact that anyone had been disciplined, that anyone that worked in this Reading branch had been sacked. Um, I think there's a few things to look at with this, and it's something I want to discuss in slightly broader detail. There is a problem, and it is among guys, right? I'm a man, and I'm saying this is a problem we as men need to be honest about. There is this culture that you have banter, and if people complain about it, they're being wuss, or they're being a pushover, or they're being whatever. I don't like the term banter because I think it can be used basically to cover anything. What they done to this young guy was not banter. It was not just pranks. They hounded him to his death. And what we need to be very clear about is the victim was not weak. It's not that he couldn't take it. It's that any human being pushed to their boundaries will snap. Doesn't matter how tough you are. The victim was not weak. Let's not smear him by calling him weak. The people who were weak were the five worthless cards, who made his life a misery. I have nothing but hatred and contempt for these sort of bullies. And, women bully as well. That tends to be along the lines of, occasionally it's physical, but it tends to be more along the lines of nasty gossiping and bitchiness, which is also very destructive, potentially. But with guys, it's this culture of banter. The way I see it is, there's clearly a line between a group of guys having a laugh and it's shared out, it's balanced out, and targeted constant abuse of an individual. There's a world of difference. This is a huge problem, I think, in certain industries, and I think that you can find it in the armed forces. There was a scandal a few years ago well, it's about 10 years ago now, in the Deep Cut Barracks, where 4 young army cadets took their own lives because of the culture of hazing that existed in the armed forces. Now, the army will maintain they've improved since then, and they take it seriously. I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not in the army. I can't see what goes on behind closed doors, but I really, really do hope they take it seriously. What infuriates me is people who make excuses for it, and they say, "Oh well, they were too weak. They couldn't hack it," as if targeted abuse of an individual makes that person weak, as if it somehow is supposed to toughen them up. It's very different if it is a kind of shared thing whereby everyone gets the same treatment. But when it's targeted at an individual, I can't think of enough words to describe how disgusted I am by that situation and how despicable and cowardly it is. It's just, frankly, when I read the report, and this is another reason I didn't upload it, because I was pretty fuming when I made that video. Sometimes when I'm angry, I don't articulate myself in the best way. I'm still angry about it. But I cannot think of enough adjectives to describe the sort of people who do this. And I really, really think that we need to change the mentality that a bit of banter is okay. If someone is clearly uncomfortable, if someone is clearly not finding it funny, you have to draw a red line. And any jackass who says, oh, they should just lighten up or they should not be so weak, they need their head examined. They need to be shamed. I really do think that, I mean, if I was running a company, I would take zero tolerance, a total zero tolerance approach to any sort of bullying. I really would. Because it is unacceptable that people have to be tormented simply for trying to do the job, simply for trying to go about the business. It's disgusting. And it is an insidious, toxic culture that we need to change. And we need to change the mentality, especially among us guys, that, oh, it's just banter. You know, banter has its place, true banter, but not when someone is clearly uncomfortable and not when it is constantly targeted at an individual. I've had my share of some fairly serious bullying. It made me pretty unhappy as a younger man, and I'm not suggesting it was quite as bad as this, but I had some pretty bad abuse, and you could say, oh, well, most people have been bullied at some point, but if anything, that should make us more empathetic. What I find unfortunate about this incident is apparently there's been no consequences. The company's issued regrets and that they're sad about it, but if they, you know, it wouldn't be that difficult. Surely there's not that many people working at this plant in 2015 to trace those people. And if they're still working at the plant, they need to be fired immediately. And if they're not working there, I hope they're exposed. I'm not usually one for vigilantism, but in this case, I hope the worthless cards responsible are exposed and publicly shamed. And I hope their souls are tortured for years. I really mean that. That's a word of conviction. You know, call it petty, call it vengeful, but I don't care. I want the people who drove this young man to his death to be haunted. I want them to feel miserable. I want them to feel about this small. I have nothing but hatred for bullies. I think they're the scummiest people around, and there needs to be a hardwiring of a changing culture that kind of promotes this idea that if you, and you know, it's little wonder. I won't go too far off on a tangent with this, but I think it's a valid point. If you look at certain celebrities that are held up to be funny or great guys, and they're basically just pretty unpleasant individuals, I'm thinking of the likes of Gordon Ramsay, who basically is a bully. He yells in people's faces. He puts people down. They can't defend themselves. He's a bully by definition. And yet, because he's a great chef, he's held up to be some sort of hero. Give me a break. The guy is a jerk. He's a complete punk. He's a card who yells at people who he knows they cannot defend themselves. Why? Because they're apprentices. They're junior chefs. He's a very insecure thug, as far as I'm concerned. I've never had respect for Gordon Ramsay. And he's not the only one. If you look at the sort of culture on shows like Britain's Got Talent, they will deliberately let people through who are not very good, but they'll do it just so that that hideous crowd can jeer and heckle them. It's disgusting. It's a very mean spirited form of entertainment, and I do not like it. Look at some of our so called stand up comedians who think that they're big men by cracking jokes at disabled children, about disabled children. I don't care if people call me square. I don't care if people say, oh, have a sense of humour. Fuck that. You can't impose that sort of humour on other people and demand that they like it. I have my right. I have my freedom of expression to say it is bullshit. And I think it is insidious. I'm not calling for it to be banned. I'm just saying that why is it we hold up bullying and treating people like dirt to be some sort of great thing? Like it's a form of entertainment. So I really hope Audi has a serious review of their company policies. If I was the CEO of Audi after this tragedy, after this preventable tragedy, I would be making a tour of every single plant in the UK, demanding to know what the corporate culture is there and demanding that the local managers take this problem seriously. One death is one too many. And frankly, it makes my blood boil. But what makes me even angrier is people who make excuses for it. People who say that victims of this sort of bullying are weak. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions about bullying. One of them is that it's always a case of there's kind of what I would call a comic book bully. That is kind of, he's usually a big 6 foot guy who's full of muscles and he picks on all the little kids. That might happen, but the more realistic actual form of bullying is group bullying, where you get this group dynamic of people who have a pack mentality and they target an individual. And it's got nothing to do with age or size. Very often the same age, sometimes younger. As for physical size, that's totally irrelevant. It's, I mean, obviously it's relevant if the bully is physically stronger, but that is a caricature of bullying. And the problem with that caricature is it then leads to the misconception that if the people who are tormenting others are younger and they don't look physically that intimidating, then it's fine. Any sort of constant abuse of a person will wear that person down. It's not because they're weak, it's because they're human. And I defy anyone. People who apologize and make excuses for bullies are as bad as bullies, as far as I'm concerned. And it sickens me. It really, really sickens me to the core that we have these attitudes in society. If I ever become a business person, it's an idea that I've flirted with. If I ever do, if I ever improve my business knowledge and go down that path, this would be one of my absolute priorities, making sure that my employees feel that they're working in safety and that they're not in a situation whereby they are constantly being harassed in this way. It's disgusting. And I hope the people who hunted this young man to death are haunted. I really, really do. Because they've faced no consequences. There's no criminal offence in this country of bullying, and yet we see the consequences. So there needs to be a zero tolerance approach. And I do believe that bullies need to be shunned. They need to be polarized. And those idiots who try to put this on a moral equilibrium, like they say, oh, it's just two people having a fight. I appreciate it isn't always easy when you have one person's word against another. But when there's a clear culture going on of an individual being targeted, very often it is quite obvious because they think it's harmless. So they're not hiding it because they don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. That's my thoughts. And my heart goes out to this young man's family. What they have been through, I can't imagine. But one death is one too many. Let me know your thoughts.